Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm the founder and owner of Ibis Prep, and today is class number 3 of the MBE course for the July 2026 bar exam. We're going to do everyone's favorite thing, which is live practice questions together. This class is brought to you by Ibis Repair Group. We can repair anything in your home or office, and we're super excited to do that for you. So, if you don't mind, Brianna, could you share your screen? And we'll do the first question together. I'm gonna uh, launch a poll for all of us to do. Um, let's see. Yeah, can everyone see this poll? All right, cool. I'll read the first one. I'll read the first few, and then maybe we'll popcorn around and let some of y'all read them. Um, Remember, you were to also write some of their own questions. So some of these questions are not NCBE questions, but they're still good practice. Some of y'all already answered A. I guess jump the gun. Let's hope you're right. Okay. Assuming the $5,000 per day liquidated damage clause in the contract between the textile company and the customer is valid, which of the following arguments will serve as the mechanic's best defense to the textile company's action? On March 1st, a mechanic contracted to repair a textile company's knitting machine by March 6th. On March 2nd, the textile company contracted to manufacture and deliver specified cloth to a customer on March 15th. The textile company knew that it would have to use the machine then under repair to perform this contract. Because the customer's order was for a rush job, the customer and the textile company included in their contract a liquidated damages clause, providing that the textile company would pay the customer $5,000 for each day's delay in delivery after March 15th. The mechanic was inexcusably 5 days late in repairing the machine, and as a result, the textile company was 5 days late in delivering the cloth to the customer. The textile company paid $25,000 to the customer as liquidated damages and then sued the mechanic for $25,000. Both the mechanic and the textile company knew when making their contract on May 1st that under ordinary circumstances, the textile company would sustain few or no damages of any kind as a result of a 5-day delay in the machine repair. Assuming that the $5,000 per day liquidated damages clause in the contract between the textile company and the customer is valid, which of the following arguments will serve as the mechanic's best defense to the textile company's action? By entering into the contract with the customer while knowing that its knitting machine was being repaired, the textile company assumed the risk of any delay lost to the customer. In all probability, the liquidated damages paid by the textile company to the customer are not the same amount as the actual damages sustained by the customer in consequence of the late delivery of the cloth. The mechanic had no reason to foresee that on March 1st that the textile company would suffer consequential damages in the amount of $25,000. Time was not of the essence in the contract between the mechanic and the textile company. So it's a long question. You guys can take your time and revisit it. All right. If you guys want to click your last answers, sometimes if you don't have enough time or you feel rushed, don't worry. It's just practice. Um, I'm gonna share the results. So most people pick C. Some of y'all picked A, but I feel like most of y'all picked A, actually clicked A before even hearing the question. But does anyone want to explain why they think C is the right answer? Go ahead, Nina.
Because it says that both the mechanic, so I think the key fact in this pattern was that um, both the mechanic and the textile company knew when making their contract on March 1st that under ordinary circumstances, the textile company would sustain few or no damages of any kind as a result of the 5-day delay. And so consequential damages focus on foreseeability, and um, there was no way for this company to foresee that.
Right. I agree. I think it's a strong argument that exactly what Maria was saying and what Nina was saying. And Tenny, you have a point to make?
Yes, isn't it if like the mechanic knew that they had those damages, then if they had the damages like in the past, there's been questions like, oh, with if they finish if a contractor finishes a job within before the deadline, then they get a bonus or something. If they know about it, then they could get damages for it, but if the other party doesn't know, then it's not fair to them.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree that you're all right about this. If they would have known, if it was foreseeable, they would have been able to recover these consequential damages. But because it was unforeseeable and they had no reason of knowing, they're not going to be able to recover. It would be their best argument. So I think we should go with C here. You agree, Brianna?
Yeah, I do. I don't know why my screen is being shared this way. I'm gonna fix it really quick.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
All right, let's see if we're right. Nice, good work. Okay, and then UWorld, I think what's nice about UWorld is their explanations, right? Especially if you scroll down to the bottom, they do like key takeaways for some of their questions. So, or educational objectives. So, in a word of consequential damages for losses arising from non-breaching parties' special circumstances, appropriate only if the breaching party knew about the special circumstances or could have reasonably foreseen the harm and lay the special circumstances that would result from the breach. So, real quick way, if you go to the are you able to share the other tab?
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know.
Can you see
Yeah,
it?
okay. Yeah,
Okay.
you're doing fine. Okay. So consequential damages must be foreseeable um in order for the non-breaching party to recover. For instance, if the breaching party had no reason to foresee that special damages would arise as a result of the breach. Consequential damages are not recoverable. All right, nice. All right, let's try the next question and hopefully we can keep it moving. All right. Um, Under the shop owner's timely receipt of both the shipment and the supplier's facts, which of the following best describes the rights and duties of the shop owner and the supplier? And by the way, it's all anonymous. I don't know who got the questions right or wrong, so don't worry if you get it wrong. I really don't know. So, in the shop owner's timely receipt of both the shipment and the supplier's facts, which of the following best describes the rights and duties of the shop owner and the supplier? A shop owner faxed the following signed message to his longtime widget supplier. Urgently need blue widgets. Ship immediately 3 gross at your current list price of $600. Upon receipt of fax, the supplier shipped 3 gross of red widgets to the shop owner and faxed him the following message. Temporarily out of blue. In case red will help, I'm shipping 3 gross at the same price. Hope you can use them. Upon the shop owner's timely receipt of both the shipment and the supplier's fax, which of the following best describes the rights and duties of the shop owner and the supplier? The shop owner may accept the shipment, in which case he must pay the supplier the list price, less any damage is sustained because of non-conforming shipment, or he may reject the shipment and recover from the supplier for total breach of contract, subject to the supplier's right to cure. The shop owner may accept the shipment, in which case he must pay the supplier the list price, less any damage sustained because of non-conforming shipment, or he may reject the shipment provided that he promptly covers by obtaining conforming widgets from another supplier. The shop owner may accept the shipment, in which case he must pay the supplier the list price, or he may reject the shipment, in which case he has no further rights against the supplier. The shop owner may accept the shipment, in which case he must pay the supplier the list price, or he must reject the shipment and recover from the supplier for total breach of contract. Okay. Anyone else want to make an answer choice? All right. So it seems that we have a discrepancy between A and C. Does anyone want to argue why they think A is the correct answer?
I can.
Go ahead.
This is non-conforming, so in non-conforming, you have to give the breaching party an opportunity to cure. And so if you accept, you could either accept, reject, or accept in part and reject in part the part that was not conforming. So that's why I think it's a.
Okay, so I understand that argument that you're saying this is a prompt shipment of a non-conforming good, which constitutes an acceptance and a subsequent breach. But they could either accept it and then they have to pay the price minus any damages, or they can reject it and then recover for total breach.
So I
Go ahead.
think that would be correct if there was no note saying hope you can use these.
Right. I think you might be onto something. So you believe that there's a note, which everyone's in the chat is writing a notice of accommodation. So the notice of accommodation, what answer would that direct you to picking?
C.
C. Okay, and let's look at C. They
Is
may
it
accept the
really a
shipment.
note? He's just offering. It's not like he's saying, I'll get you another color by another day.
Right, but it is a notice of accommodation.
He's saying like I'm temporary out of blue. Like if he just sent the red, that I think that would count as an acceptance and a breach of contract. But since he's put the note temporary out of blue in case red will help and
Right.
shipping these I think that's definitely
Yeah, a notice of accommodation. I mean,
yeah.
I agree with you, Stino, that this is a classic notice of accommodation, meaning, hey, I shipped you these non-conforming goods, but I'm telling you why I shipped them because I'm trying to accommodate you with a counter offer, right? So this is a classic notice of accommodation. Even though the majority of the students picked A, I actually agree with Stino here that the best answer is probably C based on the notice of accommodation. If it was just a prompt shipment of non-conforming goods, it would constitute an acceptance and a subsequent breach. But if it's a prompt shipment of non-conforming goods accompanied by a notice of accommodation, that actually acts as a counteroffer. And if it's a counteroffer, right, he can accept it and pay the supplier the list price, or he may reject it and have no further rights against the supplier because it wasn't a breach, it was a counteroffer. So I actually like C here. Brianna, what were you thinking after hearing the class?
I was going with A, but I can see why C is the correct answer now.
Yeah. Are you able to go back to the
Yeah.
sorry. I like C here. If I'm wrong, if I'm lying, I'm flying economy, right? Yeah, I think it is C. Good job. So the shop owner may accept the shipment, in which case he must pay the supplier the list price, or he may reject the shipment, in which case he has no further rights against the supplier. So you can see the little chart here that this is a shipment of non-conforming goods that comes with a notice of accommodation. And if there's a notice of accommodation, the effect is a rejection and a counteroffer. So if it was with no notice, it would be an acceptance and a breach. But here, this is a classic notice of accommodation, meaning like, hey, I didn't have what you were asking for, but I'm giving you this in case you can take it. That's what a notice of accommodation is. So it's an offer of similar goods for the buyer to consider. So if we go to the key takeaway, under the UCC, a seller can accept an offer to buy goods for prompt or immediate shipment by promising to ship or actually shipping confirming goods. However, shipping non-conforming goods serves as both a rejection and counteroffer if the seller notifies the buyer that the shipment was merely an accommodation. So if you go to my cram guide, this is how I'll kind of distill this. So a shipment of non-conforming goods in response to a prompt shipment order constitutes a breach and I'm sorry, constitutes an acceptance and immediate breach. However, if the shipment of non-conforming goods is accompanied by a notice of accommodation, this will constitute a rejection and counter offer, which the original offeror may accept or reject, period. And then sometimes, because people this is why I teach cram guides. It's not just about the black letter law. Sometimes it's about reminding us of the specific question. So for instance, if A asks for shipment of blue widgets and B responds by shipping red widgets with a note that says, out of blue widgets, am sending red widgets in the hope that you might need them. This is a notice of accommodation.
Thanks for
So
adding that. I was just wondering if an accommodation is basically a replacement and eventually getting them what they require, or it could count as both. In this case,
it's not necessarily saying you're going to get them what they require. It's kind of saying you have a substitute that might fit, but it might not.
got it.
Like, yeah, hey, you ordered the Sumitomo tires. I don't have them. I have Goodyear tires. Maybe you'll take them. And they're like, yes, Goodyear will be fine. They're like, no, Goodyear's trash. I don't, you know what I mean? It's a counter offer to replace the contracted goods with substitute goods. And now it's up to the other party to decide if those substitute goods will fit or not. But there's no requirement that they say, hey, I'm going to get you the blue widgets next week. Take the red widgets for now. It really is a counter offer of new goods, right? Substitute goods.
Thank you.
No, for sure. And that was good. I mean, literally, you already saw that most of the class got that question wrong. So that should help you guys feel a little bit better that you're not the only ones and, we're all in this together. All right, let's try the next question. Okay, so if the supplier delivers the ointment, how much is the supplier likely to recover from the hospital? On December 1st, a supplier sent a hospital the following email. I'll sell you 10,000 tubes of ointment at $4 per tube, a 20% discount off our normal price of $5 per tube. The offer will remain open for 7 days. The email lacked a handwritten signature but contained the supplier logo. On December 4th, the supplier called the hospital's purchasing agent and informed her that the supplier was revoking the December 1st offer. The next day, the hospital's purchasing agent placed an order for 10,000 tubes of ointment, saying that the hospital would pay the discounted price of $4 per tube. If the supplier delivers the ointment, how much is the supplier likely entitled to recover from the hospital? $40,000 because the supplier was bound to keep the offer open for 7 days. $40,000 because the supplier's revocation was not in writing. $50,000 because the hospital did not provide consideration to hold the offer open, or $50,000 because the offer was not signed by the supplier. Y'all are cracking me up in this chat. I'll tell you, the bar is definitely run by capitalists, and so is law school, and so is pretty much everything in this universe. If you want to find the reason for things and it doesn't make sense, it's probably to line someone's pocket. Okay, this one, the class seems to be all picking the same answer for the most part. Let me end the poll and share this results. So everyone's saying A. We kind of talked about this before the recording, right? Does anyone explain why they think A is the best answer?
Firm offer rule.
Right, it's a firm offer. But what about this part where it lacked a handwritten signature but contained the supplier logo? Is that bothersome?
That counts as a signature, right?
Right. On the bar exam, don't pick an answer because the signature, like I know Trump and Biden had their little thing about, oh, the signature wasn't, it was stamped or whatever. On the bar exam, that's totally fine. Anything that, is a facsimile or represents a signature, even if it's letterhead, will count as a signature. So here, some people picked B, but the revocation doesn't need to be in writing, right? The firm offer needs to be in writing. Revocation could be in writing, but that wouldn't be determinative. The revocation was ineffective because they were bound to keep it for 7 days. And then C, we don't need consideration for a firm offer. We only need consideration for an options contract at common law. So I like A here. Let's try A, Brianna. Exactly. So pretty simple, right? A merchant, let's just go to the key takeaway. Under the UCC firm offer rule, an offer is irrevocable if the offer is a merchant who provides a signed written assurance that the offer will remain open. So perfect. Under the firm offer rule and a written, let's say a signed written offer by a merchant will remain open even without consideration. And how long will remain open? For the stated time period or up to 90 days. And then just so we know, on the bar exam, a letterhead is sufficient to constitute a signature. All
Andrew,
right,
I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
go ahead.
Does anything else count as a signature besides an actual signature or letterhead?
Yeah, honestly, be very wary to say that something's not a signature. They give you any indication of some sort of authorization, that'll be a signature, whether it's a drop of blood, whether it's their stamp, whether it's their letterhead, whether it's like, a DocuSign thing, like pretty much anything that would seem to be a signature will be a signature. I've never seen a question where the answer has been no, the signature is invalid because under the UCC, a signature must be X, Y, or Z. So it can be electronic, it could be written, it could be signed, it could be a handprint, it could be a letterhead. It can pretty much be anything that reasonably could be understood to constitute a signature. And then Morgan, you have a question?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so this is something I never understood. If, and it's probably a stupid question, but if, so obviously under the firm offer rule, you have to leave it open for a period not to exceed 90 days. But if, like here, where there was a stated time period, it has to be left open for at least that many days, correct? So if we have a question where it's like, because I think I had a question the other day where it was like they made an offer on, I don't remember what it was, like November 22nd, and on November 25th they revoked the offer, but it was a it was a written firm offer from a merchant. That's not allowable at all, regardless of like anything, right?
Well, I think you just have to really understand the rule as written. The offer will remain open for the stated time period if the time period is stated. So if they say this offer is going to remain open for 2 days, they can revoke it 3 days later, certainly. But if they don't state a time period, then it will remain open for 90 days, right? So that's the caveat where it's for the stated time period, and that's how long it will remain open. Or if it's not stated, then it will remain open for 90 days.
Okay.
Like do you mean up to 90 days or like 100% 90 days?
Well, why I say up to 90 days because it's not stated. So you can assume
Okay.
that, yeah, right. Like if it's stated, it'll be 14 days, it'll be 12 days, it'll be however long it's stated. But if it's not stated, then it can be 90 days. Now, what if they say it'll be open for 120 days? Well, then they could still revoke it on the 91st day, right? It's up to 90 days that will remain open. You can't have it open for longer, even if it's stated longer. It's up to 90 days is what that means. So B was bad because it had to be open regardless. It didn't matter the revocation wasn't in writing. Revocations do not need to be in writing. So like the revocation, if it was valid, even though it was oral, would have been effective. It wouldn't be determinative if the revocation was in writing or was oral. The oral revocation would have been effective if it hadn't been required to be open. So that's the kind of the thought about that. All right, let's try the next question. So let's see. If the buyer sues the dealer to rescind the transaction, is the buyer likely to succeed? During negotiations to purchase a used car, a buyer asked the dealer whether the car had ever been in an accident. The dealer replied, "It's a fine car and has been thoroughly inspected and comes with a certificate of assured quality." Feel free to have the car inspected by your own mechanic. In actuality, the car had been in an accident and the dealer had repaired and repainted the car, successfully concealing evidence of accident. The buyer declined to have the car inspected by his own mechanic, explaining that he would rely on the dealer's certificate of assured quality. At no time did the dealer disclose that the car had previously been in an accident. The parties then signed a contract of sale. After the car was delivered and paid for, the buyer learned about the car's involvement in a major accident. If the buyer sues the dealer to rescind the transaction, is the buyer likely to succeed? No, because the buyer had the opportunity to have the car inspected by his own mechanic and declined to do so. No, because the dealer did not affirmatively assert that the car had not been an accident. Yes, because the contract was unconscionable. Yes, because the dealer's statement was intentionally misleading and the dealer had concealed evidence of the accident. All right, I love to see this. We got 25 out of 25 people picking the same answer. Oh, never mind. Had to have someone. Yeah, it's definitely Miami dealership. I agree. All right. Well, everyone but one person, and if you are that one person, it's okay. Pick D. That this is concealment, right? I agree. Let's rock with concealment. We don't really need to argue against the one person. But if they're right, they're right. But it is actually answer choice D here. Do they give you a key takeaway here? See, sometimes they don't. This might mean that they wrote the question themselves or whatever it may be. I don't really know what's going on. You know, UWorld was actually started as a medical company in India, but then they acquired Themis and now they have a little bit of a motion, let's say. So yeah, I'll put the key takeaway myself here, which is if a car dealer represents that a car has never been in an accident, but in reality, it was in a car crash, this constitutes concealment. And the buyer has no duty to buy the car due to the misrepresentation. Right? I think that's fair, solid. You guys pretty much all got that one right. All right, let's try the next one. So if a court finds that the contract to be completely integrated, is the presence offered evidence admissible? A written construction contract began with the following recital. This agreement between a real estate company, hereafter called the owner, and a construction company and the construction company's president, hereafter called the contractor, witnesseth. The signatures to the contract appear in the following format. Real estate company by S president, construction company by S vice president, and S president as representatives of construction company. The construction company became insolvent and defaulted. The real estate company sued the president of the construction company individually for the breach, and at the trial, the president offered evidence from the pre-contract negotiations that only the construction company was to be legally responsible for performing the contract. If the court finds the contract to be completely integrated, is the president's offered evidence admissible? No, because of the application of the four corners rule, under which the meaning of a completely integrated contract must be ascertained solely from its terms. No, because the legal effect of the president's signature cannot be altered by evidence of prior misunderstandings. Yes, because the evidence would contradict neither the recital nor the form of the president's signature. Or yes, because the writing is ambiguous as to whether or not the president was intended individually to be a contracting party. Okay. I think most of the class is on to the right answer here. Just in general, we all know the parole evidence rule. We're not going to allow extraneous evidence to contradict the terms of a fully integrated contract. but there are a lot of exceptions. And from my experience, they usually test the exceptions more than the rule itself. So what are some of the exceptions to the parole evidence rule? Well, parole evidence could come in to show a condition to the contract, to clarify ambiguous terms, to show a defect in formation like fraud or duress, to show custom trader usage, to show an additional term, anything to add meaning to the contract. And here I think that's exactly what's going on. Is it's not clear if when the president signed, they were signing on behalf of themselves or they were signing on behalf of the company. So can we bring in this pre-contract negotiations that show that only the construction company was to be legally responsible for performing the contract? I think absolutely. I think it is going to clarify an ambiguous term. So I agree with the class here that D, the writing is ambiguous as to whether or not the president was intended individually to be a contracting party. Let's run it. Yeah, nice. And you can see, look, only 44% of people got this right. And here's another thing to understand when you see these percentages. Those percentages are all cap, right? Those are lies. Why? Because a lot of students, I would say the majority of students are actually retakers. And retakers have seen all these questions before. So a lot of people are getting questions right only because they've seen them before. So it's actually not a true indicator of the percentages. I think that you can understand that when you see these percentages, they're all actually a little bit inflated. So if you see 44% of students got it right, that means probably only 25% of them got it right the very first time. So, that could probably help you with your confidence. But yeah, I agree. And we can bring in exceptions to parole evidence to show conditions, subsequent modifications, defects in formation, defects in enforcement, ambiguous terms, conditions to contract, whether it's completely integrated and such. All these are times when it could come in. So if we go to the key takeaway, let's see what they say. The parole evidence rule, all right, they spelled parole evidence, right? Does not bar evidence of prior contemporaneous agreements when it's being offered to establish the meaning of an ambiguous term. So parole evidence is admissible to add meaning to the contract, for example, to clarify an ambiguous term. If a president signed a contract and it is not clear if they were signing on behalf of themselves individually or on behalf of the company, pre-contract negotiations that show that only the company was liable under the contract are admissible as exceptions to parole evidence to clarify ambiguous terms, right? And again, the same thing I said yesterday if you were in my Florida essay class, when I do these workshops, I mean, yeah, they're fun, they're amazing, I like them, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. You should be doing this on your own, and I'm really teaching you a strategy. I'm teaching you a way of studying, and I think this is the most effective way of studying. Do the questions, whether you get them right or wrong, honestly, unless it's just so easy you get it right, there's nothing you can learn from it. But whether you get it right or wrong and there's something to learn from it, document what you've learned from it, and then you'll have a running cram guide, and then just reinforce and study these cram guides over and over and over again. Because the thing about the MBE is you can know the black letter law, you can master the outlines, you could have watched all of the videos that, they sell to you with your law school or whatever, and you could bomb this test. That's why I really try to teach the questions more than anything else, because, we have a saying, same clown, different wig. On the test, you're not going to see any of the same questions. There will be no repeat questions, but there's going to be a lot of similar fact patterns where the correct answer is the correct answer for the same reasoning. And you really just want to learn the test more than anything. And this is a good way of learning those correct answers, right? All right, let's try the next one.
Andrew, I have a question quickly if I can
Yeah,
ask.
go ahead.
So on this question in A, it says the four corners rule. Is
Yeah.
there any specific question that we should look out for that answer? Because I've already seen it twice.
Well, that is the parole evidence rule. The parole evidence rule means that fully integrated contracts should be understood between the four corners, meaning if you have an agreement, a contract with me, and I'm gonna sell you a blue boat, right? And now you want to bring in evidence of another, conversation we had where we said it was a red boat. What's the application? The application, we're going to look at the four corners of the contract. It's a blue boat. We're not going to bring in evidence that it's a red boat. That's outside the four corners of the contract. So the four corners of the contract rule means that we're not bringing in outside terms to contradict the contract. So that is a real rule. That's what I was saying. Like the parole evidence rule is the four corners rule. It's just usually they test exceptions. Now on the exam, if they try and say, hey, can we bring in evidence that the boat's supposed to be blue? And answer choice A says no, because in the parole evidence rule, a contract must be understood between its four corners. That would be the correct answer. So the four corner rules is like the rule of parole evidence. This is just testing the exception. So that four corners thing is a valid legal terminology. It just wasn't the correct answer to this question.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're fine. My professor said D is usually wrong on the bar exam. Is he full of shit and I should delete that from my memory? Yeah. Give him, you know what you should do to him? Give him 50 random questions and tell him to take the test, see what score he gets, and then take his word for it. I'm just a big believer in I don't like to learn from talkers. I like to learn from doers. All right, let's see the next question. Okay, if the broker moves to dismiss the hoarder's complaint, which of the following is the broker's best argument in support of the motion? All right, a broker needed a certain rare coin to complete a set that he had contracted to assemble and sell to a collector. On February 1st, the broker obtained such a coin from a hoarder in exchange for $1,000 and a written promise to redeliver to the hoarder no later than December 31st of this year, a comparable specimen of the same kind of coin. On February 2nd, the broker consummated the sale of the complete set to the collector. On October 1st, the market price of rare coins suddenly began a rapid sustained rise. On October 15th, the broker wrote the hoarder, in view of the surprising market, it seems unfair that I should have to replace your coin within the next few weeks. On October 17th, the hoarder responded in writing that she was treating the broker's repudiation as final and canceled the contract. On November 15th, the hoarder sued the broker for the market value of the comparable replacement coin. If the broker moves to dismiss the hoarder's complaint, which of the following is the broker's best argument in support of the motion? Even if the broker repudiated on October 15th, the hoarder has no remedy because she failed to demand in writing that the broker retract his repudiation. Even if the broker repudiated on October 15th, the hoarder's only action would be for specific performance because the coin is a unique chattel. The broker did not repudiate the contract on October 15th and may still perform no later than the contract deadline of December 31st. Under the doctrine of impossibility, the broker is temporarily excused by the market conditions from timely performance of his coin replacement obligation. If any of y'all are hoarders out there or have family members who are hoarders and you live in South Florida, Ibis Repair Group also does junk removal. We'll definitely take that shit straight to the dump for a fee. I'm a capitalist too, unfortunately. We live in a capitalist society. Money makes the world go round. And I don't think anything you're hoarding is too valuable. All right, I think pretty much most of the class is in agreement on this one. What do you think, Brianna? You like C? Why do you like C, Brianna? Never mind.
Sorry, no, I had to
Right.
unmute. Because he didn't clearly say he wasn't gonna replace it. He just said I shouldn't have to, so
Right.
he
And I
still
remember
hasn't. So
Shakira said this yesterday when we were doing the essay and we were looking at the model answer. They did not say that a anticipatory repudiation has to be clear and unequivocal. And I was like, well, they should have, because that is the rule, especially on the MBE. It needs to be a clear and unequivocal repudiation. So yeah, I like C here. Manwinder, we do give an Ibis Prep discount for my repair services, but we don't do California. We just do South Florida, unfortunately. So yeah, here it wasn't clear and unequivocal. So if you go down to the educational objective, the doctrine of anticipatory repudiation applies when a party clearly and unequivocally, see, terminology is very important, repudiates indicates an unwillingness to perform, a promise before the time for performance arises or elapses. The non-repudiating party may treat the repudiation as a breach or ignore it and demand performance pursuant to the contract. So the key takeaways here is an anticipatory repudiation must be clear and unequivocal. For example, if A says, it seems unfair that I should have to tender the coin under these changing market conditions, this is not an anticipatory repudiation because it is not clear and unequivocal, right? This is a vocabulary test. This is a memorization test. You got to memorize those terms, clear and unequivocal, and you got to know what those terms mean. And here it was not clear and unequivocal. So under the definition, it would not constitute an anticipatory repudiation. Excellent. All right, let's try another one.
Real quick, what is this might be a stupid question. I just haven't seen it. What's the four corners rule?
So again, the four corners rule is the parole evidence rule.
Okay.
That's saying that we're not going to contradict a fully integrated contract. We're not going to bring in evidence outside the four corners, or that's why it's called four corners, because most papers have four corners unless you're writing on some circular document. But like, we're going to look at the four corners of the contract to determine what the parties agreed upon. We're not going to bring in evidence outside of the four corners. So that's what the four corners rule means, is it is the parole evidence rule. But it wasn't the correct answer to that last question because they were testing an exception to the parole evidence rule. If they were just testing the parole evidence rule, it would have been the four corner rule. All right. Didn't we just do this exact question? Whatever, we'll try it. Assuming that the $5,000 liquidated damage clause in the customer's contract is valid, which of the following arguments will serve as the mechanic's best defense to the toy company's action? On April 1st, the mechanic contracted to repair toy company's molding machine and to complete the job by April 6th. On April 2nd, the toy company contracted to manufacture and deliver specified toys to a customer on April 15th. The toy company knew they would have to use the machine then under repair to perform that contract. Because the customer's order was for a week-long toy conference, the customer and the toy company included in their contract a liquidated damages clause, providing that the toy company would pay $5,000 for each day's delay in delivery after April 15th. The mechanic was inexcusably 5 days late in repairing the machine, and as a result, the toy company was 5 days late in delivering the toys to the customer. The toy company paid $25,000 to the customer's liquidated damages and now sues the mechanic for $25,000. Both the mechanic and the toy company knew when making their contract on April 1st that under ordinary circumstances, the toy company would sustain little or no damages of any kind as a result of a 5-day delay in the machine repair. I feel like I'm in the fucking Twilight Zone right here. Assuming that the $5,000 liquidated damages clause in the customer's contract is valid, which of the following arguments will serve as the mechanic's best defense to the toy company's action? I feel like we should sue UWorld right now for breach of contract for giving us the same question twice in literally different forms. A, by entering the contract with the customer while knowing that its molding machine was being repaired, the toy company assumed the risk of any delay loss to the customer. In all probability, the liquidated damages paid by the toy company to the customer are not the same amount as the actual damage sustained by the customer in consequence of late delivery of the toys. The mechanic had no reason to foresee on April 1st that the toy company would suffer consequential damage in the amount of $25,000. Time was not of the essence in the contract between the mechanic and the toy company. All right, you guys all learned from the previous one. This one's got to be C, right? It's the very same question. Yeah, same clown, different wig. Yeah, exactly. One's from the UWorld pool, one's from the NCBE pool. Okay, now you guys know how they write their questions, and that's not uncommon in this industry, right? That's a good way of writing questions, to model them after NCBE questions. If you're doing birdie questions, we pretty much did a very similar thing. And that's cool. All right, let's try the next question. There's really nothing to take away from that. We already did that one. All right, which of the following best supports the carpenter's position that the general contractor is obligated to award the carpentry subcontract to the carpenter? Ooh, that's a tough one. A general contractor about to bid on a construction job for an office building invited a carpenter and several others to bid on this carpentry work. The carpenter agreed to bid if the general contractor would agree to give the carpenter the job provided that his bid was lowest and the general contractor was awarded the main contract. The general contractor so agreed. The carpenter, incurring time and expense in preparing his bid, submitted the lowest carpentry bid. The general contractor used the carpenter's bid and calculated his own bid, which was successful. All right, I kind of emphasized the key point here, so it was a little bit easy if you guys listen to my emphasis. Which of the following best supports the carpenter's position that the general contractor is obligated to award the carpentry subcontract to the carpenter? The carpenter detrimentally relied on the general contractor's conditional promise in preparing his bid. The carpenter gave consideration for the general contractor's conditional promise to award the carpentry subcontract to the carpenter. The general contractor has an implied duty to deal fairly and in good faith with all bidders whose bids the general contractor used in calculating its main bid to the building owner. The general contractor has an obligation to the owner of the building to subcontract with the carpenter because the carpenter's bid was used in calculating the general contractor's bid, and the carpenter is an intended beneficiary of that obligation. If you guys are struggling with this one, just remember the carpenter, incurring time and expense in preparing his bid, submitted the lowest carpentry bid. What does it sound like? Incurring time and expense. What does that sound like?
Consideration.
It sounds like consideration. Okay, this test, MBE, it's a vocabulary reading comprehension test. A lot of times, I feel like the questions are kind of ambiguous in the real world. And so that the way they make it have a clear, definitive answer is they put precise language that cannot be misconstrued, right? They wouldn't tell you Tommy had no reason to foresee of the losses for no reason, right? That was to get at consequential damages are not recoverable. Here, they would not have told you that he incurred time and expense in preparing his bid if they didn't want you to understand that to be consideration. So looking at the answers that y'all have picked, a lot of you guys have picked A. A is a good answer, right? Detrimental reliance. But remember, detrimental reliance, promissory estoppel, is a theory to overcome lack of consideration or to overcome a contract that should be in writing that was actually oral. It's a second line of defense. If there is consideration, there's no need for the detrimental reliance argument. And here they tell you there's consideration. They say incurring time and expense. So if there's consideration, we don't need to look at detrimental reliance. We only need to look at detrimental reliance if the contract is otherwise unenforceable. But here the contract is enforceable because there was consideration. And how do you know there was consideration? Because they tell you. The carpenter had consideration, right? Incurring time and expense, doing something he wasn't otherwise obligated to do, submitted the lowest carpentry bid. So that little phrase right there points us to the fact that there was consideration, and that's what makes B a better answer than A. A would be a great answer if there was no consideration, but since there was consideration, we don't need to argue a theory of detrimental reliance. So let's try B, make sure I'm right before I pontificate too more. Look, 45% of people picked A. So if you picked A, you're not dumb, right? You just need to learn how to game this test a little bit more. They wouldn't have told you incurring time and expense if it wasn't pointing you to consideration, right? So let's see if we scroll down to the key takeaway, if they agree with me. A contract is generally formed in exchange of promises supported by valuable consideration and may include conditions that delay, condition precedent, or extinguish condition subsequent a party's promised performance. Now, if we look at answer choice A, the doctrine of promissory estoppel allows a party to enforce a promise on which it reasonably and detrimentally relied when no valid contract was formed. A contract was formed here, so the carpenter's reliance is irrelevant. Really lean into that. When you need promissory estoppel, when no valid contract was formed. Why is a valid contract typically not formed on the MBE? Number one, there's no consideration. Number two, because it was oral and should have been in writing under the statute of frauds. This isn't a statute of frauds question. It's not anything of the my legs mnemonic, right? This is just a construction contract. But there must be consideration. There was consideration. There's no need for the detrimental reliance argument. Does anyone take any issues with this question and this answer? All right, so let's document what I want y'all to learn from this one, which is promissory estoppel, detrimental reliance is a theory of enforcing a contract that otherwise would not be enforceable. For instance, due to lack of consideration or because it was not in writing when it was required to be under the statute of frauds. If there is a valid contract, there is no reason to need promissory estoppel to enforce the obligations. So, for example, if a subcontractor incurs time and expense in preparing his bid, this constitutes consideration, and therefore there is a valid contract and no need to utilize the theory of promissory estoppel, detrimental reliance, to enforce the obligations. So again, really hard question. I tried to make it easy. I kept saying incurring time and expense, and still flew over people's heads. It goes to show, that professor who said don't pick answer D, he probably would have got this one wrong, right? This is a tough question that minimum competency and just knowing the law is not going to be enough. You have to have practice with the questions, with the way they're written, and be keyed into things and phrases that will point you to a specific answer. They said incurred time and expense to point you to consideration, which would make it so that detrimental reliance was not necessary. Does anyone have any issues or questions with that question? It's a tough one, but just know incurring time and expense constitutes consideration. No need for promissory estoppel if we have a valid contract. All right, let's try another one. Trust me, it's a tough test. Tough test, man. I'm a very realistic person. I'll tell people when things are easy. I'll tell people when things are hard. MBE is a hard test because of questions like that. All right, which of the following statements best supports the lender's position? A borrower owed a lender $50,000 due on March 1st. On January 10th, the lender telephoned the borrower and said that he would discharge the debt if the borrower would promise to pay the lender $45,000 by January 15th. The borrower responded, "I will attempt to get the money together." On January 11th, the lender again telephoned the borrower and said he had changed his mind and would expect the borrower to make full payment on March 1st. On January 15th, the borrower tendered $45,000 as full payment, which the lender refused to accept. On March 1st, the borrower refused the lender's demand for $50,000 and the lender sued for that amount. Which of the following best supports the lender's position? The borrower's January 10th statement was not a return promise, and therefore the lender effectively revoked his offer on January 11th. The January 10th telephone conversation between the lender and the borrower created an executory accord and therefore did not operate as a discharge of the $50,000 debt. The lender's offer to discharge the debt was a gift promise and therefore is not binding on the lender. The lender's promise to discharge the $50,000 debt was not enforceable because it was not in writing. Again, I think this one's a straight reading comprehension question. I will attempt to get the money together, right? Is that acceptance?
No, definitely not.
Nah, I don't think so. Shit, I will attempt to win the lottery, doesn't mean you're going to do something, right? It kind of goes back to that clear and unequivocal. Not that it's anticipatory repudiation, but it just has to be proper language, right? So I think I agree with what the class is saying here, that this wasn't a return promise, right? Yeah, I agree, Brianna. I agree with the class. Yeah, it's just a language here, right? So let's see what the key takeaway says. An acceptance requires an offer to make an objective manifestation of assent that's clear and unequivocal, right? Clear and unequivocal. Until the offer does so, the offer can be revoked. So if an offer is made to lower a debt and the offeree responds, "I will attempt to get the money together," This is not a clear and unequivocal acceptance, and therefore the offer may still be validly revoked. Fair enough?
Can you scroll up, Andrew, on the
If an offer is made to lower debt and the offeree responds,
Andrew,
I would go ahead.
oh, sorry. What is a gift promise? If you can go over that, that would be great.
A gift promise is a promise that's not supported by consideration. If I just say, hey, Nina, because, you are so nice to me, I'm going to give you my butterfly collection. There's no consideration, right? Gift promises are not enforceable unless injustice would result if the promise is not enforced. But typically, a gift promise is not consideration because you're just offering someone a gift. Like, hey, I want to give you, Susie, I want to gift you my car, right? Do I have an obligation to give her the car now? No. If it's like, hey, Susie, if you show up at my house on Tuesday, then I'll give you my car. That could be a promise supported by consideration because now you're showing up at the house on Tuesday, which would be a promise to do something you weren't otherwise obligated to do. But just a gift like, hey, because I like you, I'm going to give you my car. And then Susie says, well, hey, because I like you too, I'm going to give you my boat. Neither of us have an obligation to give each other the car or the boat because these are just gift promises not supported by consideration.
What
So that's
about
what there. Go ahead.
what about I think this goes to promissory estoppel, but what about if like let's say I say, hey Andrew, I wanna or you tell me I wanna or I tell you I want to give you my boat, and then you go and take a loan out and then buy gas and then do this and then get like whatever, like buy a thing at the Marines to put the boat. Now you can hold me to that because, right? Or
There's an argument. I mean, there's definitely an argument there, a promissory estoppel argument that it would be injustice would result if we didn't enforce the promise. But that's exactly when you would use promissory estoppel. That like, okay, there was no promise supported by consideration, but in order to prevent injustice and under detrimental reliance theory, we are going to enforce the promise. That would be true. Now, I'm not going to say like it's a black and white thing that like it'll definitely be enforced. I mean, there's a good argument though. There's definitely a good argument there that we would enforce the gift promise to prevent injustice under promissory estoppel theory. Really great consideration. There's a question where answer choice A is like no because gift promises are not enforceable, but then answer choice D is no unless injustice would result if we didn't enforce the gift promise, and that's the correct answer to that question. So like you're right, there are scenarios where gift promises could be enforced, but it would be under a theory of promissory estoppel, detrimental reliance, preventing injustice. Exactly. All right, let's try another question. Has anyone gotten every question right so far, by the way? All right, cool. All right, Sierra, good as shit. Let's not jinx it. Okay. If the woman sues the bank for breach of contract, will the bank's misrepresentation defense likely succeed? And again, don't be intimidated by Sierra's excellence. Like she low key was in position to pass this test the last time. And like I said, sometimes the ball doesn't roll in the net. So Sierra was already crushing it last admin and she just fell short. She came back with a vengeance. Her and I have been working together. So like she's definitely going to be leading the way. And that's not something that should intimidate other people. It's just, she's a good person to lean on. I've already told her I'm hopefully we'll give her an offer to work with the company after she gets her results. We love Sierra and it's just demonstrative that like you don't always get what you deserve in this life. I really do think Sierra deserved to pass the last time. A couple questions didn't go her way and now she's back, but she's not taking it for granted and she's working her ass off. And I really appreciate and admire that. All right. If the woman sues the bank for breach of contract, will the bank's misrepresentation defense likely succeed? A woman prepared an accurate statement of her financial condition and submitted it with a loan application to a local bank with which she had done business for many years. Shortly thereafter, the woman's financial condition worsened significantly, but she failed to disclose this fact to the bank. Unaware of the woman's changed financial condition, the bank then agreed to lend money to the woman. The bank later learned of the woman's true financial condition. The bank refused to honor its promise to lend money to the woman, contending that the party's contract was voidable at the bank's option because of the woman's misrepresentation. If the woman sues the bank for breach of contract, will the bank's misrepresentation defense likely succeed? No, because the woman did not make any subsequent affirmative misrepresentations about her financial condition. No, because the woman's representations were accurate at the time she submitted the loan to the bank. Yes, because the woman had an obligation to correct her previous representations about her financial condition in order to prevent them from being fraudulent. Or yes, because the woman had an obligation to tell the bank about her changed financial condition due to the long-standing relationship of trust and confidence between them. Oh, nice. Adrian, good job. So I feel like you guys are pretty on top of this one. So again, if we're moving too fast for some of y'all, it's okay. You know, you'll learn as we go. But everyone's picking C here for the most part. We don't like D. That's not the reason why they have an obligation. It hasn't had to do with their long-standing trust and confidence. It's the fact that if you make a representation, you have to amend them in order to prevent them from being fraudulent. Y'all are all under this obligation right now. If any of you, and I assume you all have, it's a valid assumption, applied to a bar exam or a bar jurisdiction, right, to be barred, you have an ongoing obligation to amend your application to remain truthful, right? If one of you gets a DUI tomorrow, you have to send a letter to your jurisdiction and explain it to them. If you move addresses, you have to tell them you have a new address, right? You're under an ongoing obligation to correct any previous misrepresentations that have now changed in order to prevent them from being fraudulent. So I definitely like C here. Just because they were accurate at the time you submitted them does not mean you don't have an obligation to change them if circumstances change, because you would be constituting some sort of fraud in that, or some sort of misrepresentation in that instance. Very much the same concept that y'all have with your character and fitness applications. If something changes, if you get arrested, you have to let the bar examiners know, the board of bar examiners know, or that constitutes a failure to disclose and an ongoing misrepresentation. So I like the answer C here too, like the class said. Yeah, a misrepresentation. Let's see what they said. Non-disclosure is equivalent to an assertion that a fact does not exist if the party not disclosing the fact knows that disclosure is necessary to prevent a previous assertion from being fraudulent. Okay, so if an applicant states their financial condition and later their financial condition significantly worsens, failure to update their application to reflect their current financial situation would constitute non-disclosure and a misrepresentation. Anyone have any questions about that? I think thinking about it similarly to your bar application is the best way to think about it. You have an ongoing duty to disclose if conditions were to change.
And Professor, even if the contract, like the financial agreement, doesn't say that they have to update it, you still have to update it, whether it says it or not, right? Doesn't matter.
Right. Because
Got
it
Thank you.
effectively represents a misrepresentation, right? Like they are relying on your assertions and your conditions have changed and they're relying on previous assertions that are no longer true. You're effectively conveying a misrepresentation to them. Even if it doesn't say you have a duty to do it, you do have an affirmative duty to do that. All right, let's try the next one. Okay, as of November 12th, is there an enforceable contract between the supplier and the owner? A restaurant owner sent a signed order form to a produce supplier that read, "Please ship us 100 pounds of potatoes at your current price." The supplier received the order form on November 9th. Later the same day, the supplier mailed the owner a letter with the proper address and postage. The letter stated that the order had been accepted at the supplier's current price for potatoes. On November 10th, before receiving the supplier's reply, the owner telephoned the supplier to inform the supplier that the owner had found a closer supplier and was canceling the order. The supplier asked the owner to reconsider, but the owner refused. On November 11th, the owner received the supplier's letter. Relying on the owner's telephone call, the supplier never shipped any potatoes to the restaurant. As of November 12th, is there an enforceable contract between the supplier and the owner? No, because the owner effectively revoked its offer before it was properly accepted. No, because the owner's offer could be accepted only by shipment of goods and the supplier never shipped the potatoes. Yes, because the owner's offer was irrevocable for reasonable time. Yes, because the supplier effectively accepted the owner's offer before the owner revoked it. What rule does this question implicate?
Mailbox.
Mailbox rule. What is the mailbox rule?
Mailbox rule is acceptance is on when you put in the mail, and then offer is effective on this
Right.
when you receive it.
And then
So
if
here,
rejection acceptance, it's whatever one gets there first.
Yeah.
right. And what happened here? Did they send the acceptance in the mail?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a contract here.
I think there's a contract too. And why? Because the supplier effectively accepted the owner's offer before the owner revoked it, right? I think the class is on top of this. When this is a mailbox rule question, let's go with D. See, your professor's wrong. D was the right answer.
Look
An
at that.
offer. Yeah, I'm be honest. That shit is trash to me. Like, there's a 25% chance D is the answer. An offer to buy goods for prompt or immediate shipment can be accepted by promising to ship or by shipping the goods. Once the offer has been accepted, it cannot be revoked because a contract has already been formed. So let's call this the mailbox rule. Under the mailbox rule, offers are effective upon receipt. I before E, except after C. And acceptances are effective upon dispatch. Therefore, if an acceptance has been mailed, it would be too late for the offerer to revoke the offer, right? I before E, except after C, unless it rhymes with A, like neighbor and way. I think there's another thing about that. English is tough, tough language. All right, let's try the next question. So, is a towing company's performance excused on the grounds of mistake? During an ice storm, a man's car slipped down an embankment and became lodged against a large tree. The man called a towing company and told the company's manager that the car was 100 feet down the embankment. That's lucky, said the manager, because our winch only goes 100 feet. After the manager and the man agreed on a price, an employee of the company attempted to reach the car, but it could not because the car turned out to be 120 feet down the embankment. Is a towing company's performance excused on the grounds of mistake? No, because both parties were uncertain about the distance. No, because a towing company assumed the risk by the manager's failure to examine the distance himself. Yes, because at the time of contracting, both parties were mistaken about a basic assumption on which the contract was based. Or yes, because the agreement did not allocate the risk of mistake to either party. I think we're on top of this one. And again, a lot of y'all have seen this question before. So like it's, don't be too confident, never too high, never too low. Just keep learning and getting better and reinforcing. But I agree here. There was a basic assumption that the parties were mistaken on. We thought it was 100. That's lucky. My winch goes 100 feet. Oh, it was 120. Well, that'll excuse us from obligations because there was a mutual mistake as to a basic assumption of the contract. I like C here for sure.
A quick question regarding yeah, I knew it was C2, but like well, I should say I knew it was yes. Uh would you even read like it shouted out to me yes from the get-go. Would you even read the no's, or would you
Yeah.
just you
Me
do?
personally, yeah. I mean, again, everyone's got their own style. And if I'm running out of time, maybe no. But like if I have time and time is not of the essence, I would read them all because sometimes they hit you with some tricky no, unless some totally random thing that would actually, you know what I mean? So like just because you think it's yes or no, you still have to read all four of them because they could throw a curveball at you and be like, no, unless the facts were totally different and something, something. It's like, oh, well, then no is the right answer. So I always will read them all for sure, weigh them on the scales of justice and pick the best answer. That's just my personal philosophy. I mean, if you're running out of time, then, look at both the yeses, but I personally will always read all answer choices and carefully eliminate the wrong ones and choose the correct one. Even if I have an inclination towards yes or no, I'll still read the yeses and the nos just to make sure they're not throwing some yes, but if the facts were different, then la la la. It's like, okay, well, then you couldn't make, like, there's a way I could have made this the right answer. Like, no, unless the embankment was actually 90 feet down and the question was totally lying to you, right? Like they could change things up a little bit. So I still will read all answer choices. But here, let's say a contract. What was the question? Can you go back to the question real quick? I just want to see what they asked. Yeah, okay. Performance is excused. Okay. So performance is excused in a contract if there is a mutual mistake about a basic assumption. For example, if both parties believe the car is 100 feet down the embankment and the winch only goes 100 feet, and upon arrival, it turns out the car is 120 feet down, this will excuse performance due to a mutual mistake of a basic assumption. Super clean, right? Like, I know some of this sounds redundant. Like, Andrew, why are you writing this? It's obvious. It's whatever. It's because nothing is obvious and everything needs reinforcement, and you want to just do things properly to ensure success. All right, let's try the next question. So, if the customer sues a supplier for breach of contract, is the customer likely to prevail? A restaurant supplier sent a letter to a regular customer offering to sell the customer an industrial freezer for $10,000. 2 days later, the customer responded with a letter that stated, "I accept your offer on the condition that you provide me with a warranty that the freezer is merchantable." Interesting. In response to the customer's letter, the supplier called the customer and stated that the offer was no longer open. The supplier promptly sold the freezer to another buyer for $11,000. If the customer sues the supplier for breach of contract, is the customer likely to prevail? No, because the customer's letter added a term making a counteroffer. No, because a subsequent sale to a BFP for value cut off the claims of the customer. Yes, because the customer's letter was an acceptance of the supplier's offer since the warranty of merchantability was already implied in the sale. Yes, because the supplier's letter was a firm offer that cannot be revoked for a reasonable time. All right, let's think about this one. First off, we have to orient ourselves. Are we UCC or common law?
Common
Well,
law.
UCC.
yeah,
UCC sales of
who
goods.
said common law?
Me. That was an accident.
That's like the dog that peed in. That's like the dog that peed inside. We got to take you outside right now and correct that. It is not common law. It is the UCC because it's for the sale of goods. Now, under the UCC, is an additional term going to be included? Well, yes, if it does not materially alter the terms of the contract, there will be a contract formed.
And good faith, right? Or no?
Yeah, and good faith, always good faith under the UCC. Well, here, is this a material term? The answer is no. Why? Because the UCC already provides for the implied warranties of merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. You're not actually adding any term. This actually isn't even an additional term. This is just, you know, sure, like, yes, provided that the contract is the contract, right? This term is already included under the UCC. It's not like a waiver of damages or something that would like be totally different than what the UCC provides for. You already have implied warranties of merchantability and fitness for particular purposes in UCC contracts. So the additional term doesn't do anything. So I agree with the class here that it's C. It was an acceptance since the warranty of merchantability was already implied in the sale, right? And again, look, a lot of people picked A, but under the UCC's ballot form rule, any reasonable manifestation of acceptance is effective unless it is expressly conditioned on the offer's assent to the new terms. I mean, fair enough. I would just say under the UCC, if an acceptance includes an additional term that is immaterial, the additional term will be included in the contract. If an acceptance stipulates that the goods must be merchantable, this term does not affect the contract in any manner. There is a validly formed contract because merchantability is already implied in all UCC contracts. Ooh, my mom would be upset about that effect.
By
My mom,
chance,
go ahead.
by chance, are you able to give us an example of a common law, like a common law where it would or wouldn't?
Well, common law, remember, any additional term would be a counteroffer because the common law is the mirror image test.
So
You mean
yeah, like 100% you're right. But then like I got a question and it was like I forget the question. It's hard for you to answer this, but like it was like the one exception to that. I'll see if I can find it.
yeah, you got to bring me the question. I don't know, but in general, common law is mirror image test, right? So if the acceptance contains an additional term, we're going to have a counteroffer. Under the UCC, typically we incorporate the bow the forms provision where additional terms will be included so long as they do not materially alter the terms of the contract. But this one was a UCC contract, and the additional term wasn't even an additional term. It was just, you know, a reaffirmation of an implied warranty. All right, let's try the next question, Brianna. Oh, Patrice, you had a question?
How do we know if something is immaterial or material?
That's a good question. Certain things are clearly material, right? If you say yes on the condition that damages are limited to $50, like that's material. You're limiting our relief, right? Like that's something totally material. If it says yes on the condition that the product is merchantable, that's totally immaterial because it's already implied to be merchantable. What's one that straddles the line and there's a split amongst courts? Mandatory arbitration clauses. Yes, but if there's a dispute, it must go to arbitration. The correct answer would be it's up for the courts to decide if that term is material or not, because minority and majority jurisdictions have different approaches. So again, there's no like bright line rule about what's material and what's immaterial. You just kind of have to use some common sense and just kind of look at the best answer choices. But like material things will like change the terms of the contract. They'll limit the relief. They'll do things that are like, major changes, where immaterial terms are just like, yeah, but you need to pick up the goods from my office down the street, or yeah, but it has to have I have to be able to collect consequential damages. It's like, okay, the UCC already provides for consequential damages. So if it's like something that would cause the person to not want to do the contract, I would say it's material. If it's something that's just like a little change, it's immaterial. But I think a good way to like draw a line in the sand is the mandatory arbitration clause. The mandatory arbitration clause in some jurisdictions is material, in some jurisdictions is immaterial, and the best answer would be on the test, it's up for the courts to decide if it's material or immaterial. Or the best argument would be the mandatory arbitration clause was immaterial and therefore it should be included. So again, it's like when you say what's the best way to know if it's material or immaterial, unfortunately, it's through practice and kind of compartmentalizing which terms have you seen as material, which terms have you seen as immaterial, and then putting that arbitration clause and maybe some others right on the line because they could go either way. Okay.
I had a quick question on that last one. Does it make a difference that there was a merchant and a non-merchant?
Yeah, I do think that's important, right? Because if they're merchants, then additional terms are included so long as they're not material. If it's a non-merchant, then the additional terms are considered mere proposals and they'd have to be accepted to be included. But I think the key thing about that last question is it wasn't an additional term. It was just a confirmation of an implied term.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I read it, but I was like, sometimes I don't want to go down rabbit holes. I'm not trying to confuse people, but it wasn't a determinative factor in that question. But it is important to understand that the bow the forms provision is a merchant rule, which is why I didn't love their explanation. But there's a few things I don't love about UWorld and Adaptabar and big conglomerate monsters. Okay, if the buyer sues the seller for breach of contract, is the buyer likely to prevail? A seller and a buyer enter into a written agreement providing that the seller was to deliver 1,000 cases of candy bars, ooh, tough question, to the buyer during the months of May and June. Under the agreement, the buyer was obligated to make a selection by March 1st of the quantities of the various candy bars to be delivered under the contract. The buyer did not make the selection by March 1st, and on March 2nd, the seller notified the buyer that because of the buyer's failure to select, the seller would not deliver the candy bars. The seller had all the necessary candy bars on hand on March 1st and made no additional sales or purchases on March 1st or 2nd. On March 2nd, after receiving the seller's notice that would not perform, the buyer notified the seller of its selection and insisted that the seller performed. So they were kind of like a couple days late here. The seller refused. If the buyer sues the seller for breach of contract, is the buyer likely to prevail? No, because the contract did not exist until the buyer selected the specific candy bars and the seller withdrew its offer before the selection. No, because the buyer's selection of the candy bars by March 1st was an express condition to the seller's duty to perform. Yes, because the delay of 1 day in making the selection did not have a material effect on the seller. Or yes, because upon the buyer's failure to make a selection by March 1st, the seller had a duty to make a reasonable selection. We rewrote this question on Birdie. So if you did Birdie, you should have got this question, and now you should know the answer.
The condition, right?
What about the condition?
It's something that basically has to be acknowledged, accomplished for the contract to take place.
Right. There is an express condition, but here they're testing the exception to the enforcement of the express condition,
Right.
that it didn't have a material effect on the seller, right? Because they made no, again, they gave you specific language for a reason. They made no additional sales or purchases, and then they notified of them. So they didn't change. There was no reliance. There was no effect of it. So we're going to allow the contract to still be enforced because even though the express condition wasn't met, there was no impact of it, and then it was met just a day or two later. It's going to be a 1 or 2 day delay, had no material effect. Tough question, but I think I agree with the class here that C is actually the best answer to this one. Yeah, tough question, right? So let's see what the key takeaway says. If the buyer fails to timely select the assortment of goods for delivery and the delay materially impacts the seller's performance, then the seller can proceed in any reasonable manner or treat the failure as a breach. So let's see why B is correct. Absent language requiring strict compliance, the buyer's selection of the candy bars was a constructive or implied condition to the seller's duty to perform, which could be satisfied by substantially complying, selecting a day late. So there wasn't language requiring strict compliance. So here, the parties agreed that they would select by March 1st, although the buyer made it March 2nd. The delay did not materially impact the seller's performance. This is because the seller had all necessary candy bars on hand and had entered into new contracts at the time. As a result, the seller unjustifiably refused to accept the buyer's selection, and the buyer will likely prevail. In contracts, arrangements related to shipping are the seller's duty to specify. So this is a really tough one, but A says the UCC rejects the idea that a contract must specify the assortment of goods to be valid. Here, the contract stated the buyer could select the assortment later. Okay, so let's say if there is an express condition that a selection must be made by a certain date, the UCC allows for a slight delay
A
in meeting.
slight delay, could that be like a week or?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I don't love this question. I don't know, right? I don't know exact. It's not 4 days is good, 5 days is bad. It just is really about whether there's a material effect. A slight delay in meeting conditions so long as there is no material effect of not meeting the date or there is no language requiring strict compliance. I really
So
don't
the
love it.
90-day thing doesn't apply here at all, right?
No, this isn't a firm offer. This isn't a condition. So, for example, if a candy contract requires selecting the assortment of candies by March 1st and the buyer makes the selection March 2nd and there is no material effect on the seller, the contract is still enforceable despite not strictly meeting the condition. I mean, it's a tough question, but it's just one of those ones where you learn from doing the question and then you'll see a similar question on test day and hopefully be able to get it right. All right. Let's see what the next question is. So, is the contractor likely to succeed in an action challenging the validity of the settlement agreement? A homeowner and a contractor entered into a contract under which the homeowner agreed to pay the contractor $50,000 for remodeling the homeowner's basement according to a set of plans. After the work was completed, the homeowner honestly believed there were defects in the contractor's work as well as departures from the plans. In fact, the contractor had fully performed. The homeowner offered to pay the contractor $35,000 in full settlement in exchange for the contractor's promise to surrender the entire claim. The contractor accepted the homeowner's offer, and the homeowner paid the contractor $35,000. The reasonable value of the work was $35,000. Is the contractor likely to succeed in an action challenging the validity of the settlement agreement? No, because the homeowner honestly disputed the amount he owed the contractor. No, because the reasonable value of the work was only $35,000. Yes, because the contractor reasonably relied on the homeowner's contractual promise to pay the full $50,000, and that promise should be enforced to avoid injustice. Yes, because the homeowner's payment of $35,000 cannot furnish consideration for the contractor's relinquishment of a claim for $50,000. Is anyone in this class named Karen? All right, good. I kind of refer to this as the Karen rule. If Karen is honestly upset about the work that's done, and in good faith they agree to, a new price, that's enforceable, right? It has nothing to do with the value of the work. Remember, restitution, and that is a alternative theory if we don't have a binding contract. Here we have a binding contract, and they made a settlement agreement that was an honest agreement, right? And there was consideration, right, in exchange for the contractor's promise to surrender his entire claim. So here you could say it's a modification supported by consideration. You could say that this is a reasonable agreement that's enforceable. But for all these reasons and more, I agree with the class here that the best answer actually is A over B, right? It's not about the reasonable value of the work. And it's not yes. The answer is no, you're not going to be able to challenge the settlement agreement because the settlement agreement was honestly disputed and agreed upon, and consideration was provided. Go ahead, Michelle.
How this question is different for a accord and satisfaction?
Well, it is an accord and satisfaction, right? That's what they're saying right here. It is an accord and satisfaction, and it's a disputed amount, and it's sufficient, right? So that's one way of looking at it, that here the homeowner offered to pay the contractor $35,000 in full satisfaction of his contractual obligation to pay the contractor $50,000. The contractor agreed that the lesser amount accorded, and the homeowner paid it in satisfaction. Can you scroll down a little bit? Since the homeowner honestly believed that there were defects in the contractor's work and departures from the plan, a good faith dispute, the homeowner's payment $35,000 furnished sufficient consideration to form a valid accord. Therefore, the contractor will likely not succeed. Let's see what the key takeaway is here. An accord and satisfaction requires consideration. An accord requires consideration to be valid. The consideration can only be worth less than what was agreed to in the original contract. There's a good faith dispute as to the amount owed, and the new consideration is of a different type than that was owed of the original contract. So here, let's say if a contractor and a woman agree to a $50,000 remodeling job, and the woman honestly believes there are defects, and an accord is made to pay $35,000 in exchange for releasing all claims against the woman. This is valid and enforceable because the woman reasonably, well, let's just say honestly, because the woman honestly believed there were defects.
Weird
Professor?
question, but
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Weird question, but does this? It's over it's over $500, obviously, and it's land. Like, wouldn't this have to be in writing?
That's exactly what I was gonna ask, yeah.
Well, let's go back to the question because let's go back to the question. So what needs to be in writing? Are you saying?
The new agreement, like obviously we know the first one was in writing, like that was a fine contract, but the new agreement of like, hey, instead of 50 grand, we're like 35 grand is good. Like I know it's none of the options, like I got A, but like if let's say a
Well, let
question
me
would have said.
There's a couple of things here. One, accord and satisfaction, although they should, if you're a lawyer out there, you should always put it in writing. They don't technically need to be in writing. So that part, it's just not like an accord and satisfaction must always be in writing. So we can eliminate that concept. The other two thoughts that you had, I also disagree with. The first is it's over $500. This is not a UCC
Oh, it's
contract.
not goods. Yeah, my
Not
bad.
goods. And the other, it's not for land either. It's not for the sale of land. It's for, a remodeling contract. Like I said, I have a repair company. We do repair work in people's houses all the time. That's not for land. That's for repair work. So there's no statute of frauds implication here. And it's also not necessary, although it's encouraged, that accord and satisfactions need to be in writing. So the fact that there was no writing is not determinative here.
Okay.
Morgan, you have a question?
Yeah, I think you just answered it, but so accord and satisfaction does not need to be in writing. But that it doesn't really make sense because you would think it would have to be, given that it's like you're like,
I mean, just in general, modifications, accord and satisfactions, these things don't need to be in writing. There's no bright line rule that they need to be in writing. Should they be in writing? Yeah, any good lawyer will get anything in writing. Because if it's not in writing, then you could say, hey, I didn't agree to that, right? But on the exam, there's no bright line rule that accord and satisfactions or modifications need to be in writing. So I agree with you that they should. It's logical that they should be in writing, but it's not going to be the determinative fact in a question.
I have a
what?
question.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. With C for this one, that's what I had chosen because I guess what makes C wrong, and this is why I wanted your help on it, is because he accepted the 35,000. He couldn't have, like, if he would have rejected it, then he could have sued for the full amount, right?
Yeah, but remember what we said with the last question about promissory estoppel. Promissory estoppel is almost like a recovery method. It's like, shit, there is no contractual obligation, but to prevent injustice, we're going to enforce one. But here, there was a valid contract. See what she's saying? Promissory estoppel enables a party who reasonably and detrimentally relied on a promise to enforce that promise, even though no valid contract was formed. But here, the contractor's reliance on the homeowner's contractual promise is irrelevant because there was a valid
Oh,
contract. Yeah, so we
I
don't
see
need,
now.
there's
Because
no
there was a
promise.
valid contract.
There was a valid
Got it.
contract. This is just an accord and satisfaction of a valid contract. It's not a promissory estoppel argument. All right, let's keep moving. Let's try the next question. Okay, should the court admit the evidence? A buyer purchased a new car from a dealer under a written contract that provided the price of the car was $20,000 and that the buyer would receive a trade-in allowance of $7,000 for the buyer's old car. The old car had recently been damaged in an accident. The contract contained a merger clause stating this writing constitutes the entire agreement of the parties, and there are no other understandings or agreements not set forth herein. When the buyer took possession of the new car, she delivered the old car to the dealer. At that time, the dealer claimed that the trade-in allowance included an assignment of the buyer's claim against her insurance company for damage to her old car. The buyer refused to provide the assignment. The dealer sued the buyer to recover the insurance payment. The dealer has offered evidence that the parties agreed during their negotiations for the new car that the dealer was entitled to the insurance payment. Should the court admit this evidence? No, because the dealer's acceptance of the old car bars any additional claim by the dealer. No, because the merger clause bars any evidence of parties' prior discussions concerning the trade-in allowance. Yes, because a merger clause does not bar evidence of fraud. Yes, because the merger clause does not bar evidence to explain what the parties meant by trade-in allowance. So,
There's no poll, by the way.
oh yeah, I was wondering why no one picked an answer. So this one is a pro evidence question, right? But didn't I tell you that usually the pro evidence on the test is going to come in under one of the exceptions? And what's the exception here?
Fraud.
That
Nation of terms.
Trade usage.
Yeah, we don't know, right? We don't know what they mean by trade-in allowance, right? You're saying that the trade allowance included an assignment. You're saying it didn't include an assignment. Can we bring in evidence of what the trade-in allowance includes? Yes, we can, because it's an ambiguous term. We want to clarify the meaning of that term, trade-in allowance. So I like the answer D here. Steve, I know your professor doesn't like it, but he'd be getting crushed by this test, right? Yeah, so we're going to allow this in to clarify what it means. So if you go to the key takeaway, even when the contract is completely integrated, the parole evidence rule does not bar evidence to clarify the meaning of an ambiguous term. So kind of reciting this one again, parole evidence rule does not bar extrinsic evidence to clarify ambiguous terms. For example, if a contract includes a trade-in allowance, but it is unclear whether that trade-in allowance includes a right to assign, outside evidence is admissible to clarify this ambiguous term. I think parole evidence is, tough until you get the hang of it. And it's like the answer pretty much always is clarify ambiguous terms, show condition to the contract, etc. I mean, not always. There's no black and white on the MBE. You got to read each question as an island and pick the best response. All right, let's try the next question. So, is a chef obligated to permit the new decorator to perform the agreement? So a famous chef entered into a written agreement with a well-known interior decorator who was respected for his unique designs to design the interior of the chef's new restaurant, and upon the chef's approval of the design plan, to decorate and furnish the restaurant accordingly. The agreement was silent as to assignment or delegation by either party. Before beginning the work, the interior decorator sold his decorating business to a new decorator under an agreement in which the interior decorator assigned to the new decorator, and the new decorator agreed to complete the chef's contract. The new decorator, also an experienced decorator of excellent repute, advised the chef of the assignment and supplied him with the information confirming both the new decorator's financial responsibility and past commercial success. Is the chef obligated to permit the new decorator to perform the agreement? No, because the interior decorator's duties were of a personal nature involving his reputation, taste, and skill. No, because the interior decorator's purported delegation to the new decorator of the interior decorator's obligations to the chef affected innovation. Yes, because the agreement contained no prohibition against assignment or delegation. Or yes, because the chef received adequate assurances of the new decorator's ability to complete the job. Y'all are crushing this one. Literally 100% of the class. Nope. I always speak too soon. But it was 100% of class. One person ended up picking C. But yeah, I think the answer here is A. You can't delegate a duty if it's a personal nature involving reputation, taste, and skill. It literally says here, and again, read the keyword man when you're saying who was respected for his unique designs. It's not like we're painting a wall white and you're just going to bring in another company to paint the wall white. It's like, again, the foreman for my repair company is the man. He can do custom builds and builds clubhouses and things like that. We couldn't just delegate it to some other person to build the clubhouse if you hired us to build the clubhouse for you because of our unique skills. Same thing with me as a tutor. I'm sure some of you have hired me to tutor for you. I can't just wake up one day and be like, you know what, Tommy's going to do the tutoring instead. Tommy's amazing. You'll love him. They'll be like, yeah, but Andrew, you're so unique. I wanted to work with you. I'm going to, have to pay damages. You couldn't force me to do the tutoring, right? You can't force specific performance for a contract, but you could recover damages based on the breach there. So I like A here for sure. Go ahead, Morgan.
Okay, so is there any world in which one of these questions would not be that exact answer choice or some iteration of it? Because I feel like sometimes they ask you about a wallpaper hanger and other people that are doing other different jobs, and sometimes it's like, yes, it could be, it's you can recover damages because it's based on their excellent repute or whatever. And then other times it's like, no, because technically anyone could do that job. Is there any world in which that answer choice is not going to be the answer to any of these types of questions?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's imperative to look at the language of the question. Here they said, known for his unique skills and creative designs. In my opinion, and again, I have to see the question, but if you hired my company to paint your walls white, and then we said, hey, we're going to delegate this to Susie. Susie's going to come and paint the walls white. I mean, in my world, painting is not a unique skill, right? We have 1,000 painters on our staff if we wanted to. So I feel like that's a delegable duty to paint a wall white. But if it's like, oh, we want you to paint the wall and you have a special textured, skill and you're unique and all that, then it's non-delegable. So like
Okay.
it really is fact pattern specific, but remember, take the language at face value. They said unique for special designs. That's non-delegable. If it's just, Andrew is, Ibis Repair Group was hired to paint the walls white. We delegated the duty to Susie, and there's absolutely no difference in how we would have painted and how Susie would have painted. That's going to be fine. That's going to be delegable, so long as there wasn't specific language barring delegation, because most contracts are freely assignable and freely delegable. And low key, we do that in our industry. We delegate some things. We usually sometimes will delegate air condition repair, right? Like Justin, my foreman, he's not known for his unique skills in repairing air conditioners, right? We could probably delegate that to another company and it'll all be good and well. But like I said, if it's building a clubhouse or building a fence or something that you hired us for because of our uniqueness, that would be non-delegable. But they try to give you the language in the question. If they said there's no difference between Susie painting the wall white and Tommy painting the wall white, I would assume that's delegable. If they say, Susie's the best white wall painter in the world and the whiteness that she used is like the craziest white you've ever seen and no one else could do it like her, then it would be non-delegable. I think it very much
Right.
is the language in the question.
What if you and like let's say you and Tommy are just as equal as tutors? Obviously not, but let's say you guys are, and then the contract specifically says like you are allowed to delegate, but you are better. Oh wait, no,
No, I hear you. I mean,
okay.
yeah. Okay. Um, Again, I'd have to see the question, but if there's a specific clause that says, in the event that Andrew's not available, you agree that I could delegate this to another comparable tutor, that would be allowable because it's express language in the contract. But otherwise, and personally, I believe this, tutoring is a very unique skill. So I think that typically it would be non-delegable. And even if I delegated to, Katya, who's fucking amazing, right? She might be better than me. You would be able to say, no, I don't want to work with Katya, even though she's just as good as you, Andrew. You know, your like sense of humor is what I wanted, or, your hazel eyes I wanted to peer into, right? Then it would be like non-delegable because of the uniqueness of it. So it really is fact pattern specific. And if they contract to substitution, then sure, that would be okay. But otherwise, I don't think that tutoring is a delegable duty, just personally. Patrice, you had a question?
Yes, but I'm curious to know, the fact pattern said the designer is known for his unique designs. But
Right.
we have to assume that he was hired because of that.
Um,
That's what we're assuming, right? That the chef hired him because of his unique design. It didn't explicitly say he was hired because of that.
yeah, but it does, yeah, it says that the duties were of personal nature involving his reputation, taste, and skill. So like it doesn't say it's not just that he was hired because of that, but you can assume that. I mean, that's why you hired him, right? He's well known, respected for unique designs. He probably charges more. If you didn't care about his unique designs, you would have just hired anyone off the street. But it's like they put that in there for a reason. So, I hear you. It's kind of tough. Like, but I don't think it's determinative that he was hired because of that. It's just the fact that his services are unique in nature. They're non-delegable. You don't necessarily have to be hired because of your uniqueness. If your work is unique, then it becomes non-delegable unless it's specifically contracted differently.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's try some more. I think we got Trace Mas. See what my next student is. All right, cool. 4 o'clock, I got a little break. All right, so has a contract been formed? An appliance store owner received a flyer advertising a cleaning service that dealt exclusively with commercial properties. The owner sent an email to the cleaning service that described the relevant features of the store and asked for a price quote. The owner received a reply email from the cleaning service offering to clean the store for $200 per week for a period of 52 weeks. The store owner responded, "Fine, I'll pay once a month in advance." Has a contract been formed? No, because the cleaning service is not a merchant. No, because the owner's response contained an additional term. Yes, because the owner did not expressly condition his acceptance of cleaving service agreeing to the time of payment term. Yes, because the owner is a merchant. Is there a poll here? Yeah. There must be a poll, Patrice, because people are clicking the answer.
Yeah, there's a poll.
He sent. Okay, that's a tough one. I mean, there's a chance I might get this one wrong, but I think I have an idea. All right, and the class kind of is seeming to agree with me. Most of y'all picked C. Why did someone say why they picked C? What test is this? Go ahead, Nina.
Well, I picked C because I thought it had to be yes, and D's reasoning didn't apply or make sense. So
Oh, wait.
that's why I picked C.
Actually, no, never mind. I don't think the answer is C, actually.
Is it D?
Why? Sorry, I didn't realize what C was saying. I like B, yeah. I like B. Why do y'all think it's B? Sorry.
Because
A term changed.
Yeah, and
right.
what test is this?
It's
The term
common
change.
law mirror image rule, and it's now a counteroffer.
That's what I think, yeah. So a lot of y'all
Right.
pick C, and I'd actually disagree. I think it's B. Again, I could be wrong, but I feel like this is common law, and the acceptance said, fine, I'll pay once a month in advance. That's an additional term. Now, is that term material, immaterial? It doesn't matter. This is not UCC. This is common law. Any additional term in the acceptance constitutes a counteroffer. Before I go too far, let's see if B really is the right answer.
I
All right, yeah, exactly. It's common law mirror image test. So that's again, listen, most people in the class pick C. So if you got this one wrong, you're not some dummy. It's just you got to read carefully. So under the common law mirror image test, the terms of the acceptance must match the terms of the offer exactly. Any additional term in an acceptance constitutes a counteroffer. Shit. Counteroffer. For example, if A offers B cleaning services for 52 weeks and B responds yes, and I will pay once a month, this is an additional term that fails the mirror image test and no contract has been formed.
I thought it had to say something along the lines if, like if I pay once a month or something. But he was just like adding it. Wouldn't that be just like if it's reasonable, wouldn't that be allowed?
I think it's more of a strict interpretation of the mirror image test. It's an additional term. It said, fine, I will pay. Fine, I'm adding an additional term to it. That's not mirror image acceptance, right?
But if they're both merchants, it would have been fine, right?
No, because this is common law. Merchants apply under the UCC. This is a services contract. So when you're thinking about the bow the forms provision amongst merchants, that's for UCC contracts. At common law, it does not matter if they're merchants or not merchants. They were just trying to trick you. That was a red herring, if you will. So it had no determinative impact whether they were merchants or not. The strict rule is at common law for service contracts, any additional term in acceptance constitutes a counteroffer and not an acceptance, right?
But if it's a sale of goods contract and they're both merchants and an additional term was added, it's part of the contract?
Absolutely. If I had wheels, I'd be a wagon. That wasn't this question. This was a services contract, so we're not considering if it was a UCC merchant contract. Like, again, that's a different question and a different answer. But this question specifically, you got to stay locked in on the facts, was a common law contract, and under common law, additional term constitutes a counteroffer. All right, let's try the next one. I'm not being mean when I say that if I had wheels, I'd be a wagon. I don't know where I got that from. I just find that phrase hilarious.
Can I take a picture of the last question real quick?
Yeah. Do you mind going back? Yeah.
Thank you. All right, you're good. Thank you.
All right, cool. Is a rancher liable for the loss? An experienced rancher contracted to harvest his neighbor's wheat crop for $1,000 when the crop was ripe. In early September, the neighbor told the rancher that the crop was ripe. The rancher delayed because he had other customers to attend to. That seems like a very important sentence. The neighbor was concerned that the delay might cause the crop to be lost, for hailstorms are common in that part of the country in the fall. In fact, in early October, before the crop was harvested, it was destroyed by a hailstorm. Is the rancher liable for the loss? No, because no time for performance was established in the contract. No, because the neighbor failed to tell the rancher that the crop might be destroyed by a hailstorm. Yes, because a party who undertakes a contractual obligation is liable for all consequences that flow from his breach. Yes, because at the time the contract was made, the rancher had reason to foresee the loss as a probable result of his breach. This is the third consequential damages question we've done. It's all about foreseeability. I don't like C. In fact, I hate C. Is liable for all the consequences that flow from his breach. That's way too broad. All of the consequences, like, if you understand anything about the butterfly effect and the ripple effect, I mean, they'd be responsible for the end of time. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not the answer. It's not all consequences, but it is the foreseeable one. So here, the whole class, finally, we all got this one right. Let's see. Yeah, D. Right. And if we scroll down to the bottom, this is consequential damages. Consequential damages are recoverable only if they're reasonable foreseeable when the contract was made. So we'll just reinforce this one. Consequential damages. And I like how they write special damages. What I've always defined consequential damages as would be lost opportunities are recoverable only if they were foreseeable, right? Foreseeability is the key here. And here was definitely foreseeable. You knew that there was hailstorms. You chose not to harvest them. Like, you're definitely going to be responsible for the additional losses because of the foreseeability component. All right. Let's see if we can try another question. All right, this is the last question of the day. You guys have been doing amazing today. Sierra, are you still here, Sierra? And Adrian?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are either of you got a perfect score so far?
Yeah.
Let's go. All right, let's not jinx it. So, how is the court likely to rule? And I'm going to test you guys. You better tell me what the answer is. So, at the auction of construction equipment owned by a contractor, several lots were offered for bidding, and the highest bids for each were accepted by the auctioneer. The auctioneer then announced that a lot that consisted of a backhoe was being auctioned off. Several bids for the backhoe were acknowledged by the auctioneer. Just before the auctioneer brought down her gavel, she glanced at the contractor. The contractor gave the auctioneer a prearranged signal. Acting in accord with the signal, the auctioneer stated that the backhoe was being removed from the auction. There had been no indication as to whether the auction was being held with or without reserve. The highest bidder on the backhoe, contending that he is now its owner, has brought suit against the contractor. How was the court likely to rule? For the contractor, because the auctioneer had not brought down the gavel, announcing the completion of the sale of the backhoe. For the contractor, because the backhoe constituted equipment. For the highest bidder, because the contractor forfeited his right to withdraw the backhoe by prearranging a signal with the auctioneer, or for the highest bidder, because the contractor lost the right to withdraw the backhoe once the auction began. All right, this one interesting. 33%. 33% is definitely a discussion to be had. And I really wonder if Adrian and Sierra are in agreement. But why don't you guys take, another 20 seconds or so to look through it and pick your answer. All right, anyone else want to put their answer in? All right, let's hear from Sierra and Adrian. Ladies first, Sierra, what do you think the answer is and why?
Well, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know much about auctions. So, um, this might be the end of my streak. But I went with A.
Okay. And Adrian, what'd you go with?
I also put A.
I also like A here. I mean, again, I'm not a master of auctions either, but I just feel like they had the right to, you know, it says with or without reserve, meaning they could reserve it, right? So like they did reserve it. They gave them the special signal and they took it off. So I think in an auction, until the gavel has been brought down, there has not been a sale. All right. So A gang, a lot of people picking A. Nina, what do you think?
But I picked C because I thought for fairness reasons, like the court wouldn't allow. Like I thought the prearranged signal was,
Some bullshit. I hear you.
yeah,
I'd be pissed, but
like it
I
would be
think
unfair to do
I
that.
think low key this is auction law. Let's learn about auction law together. So um type of auction. So I think about this reserve. The auctioneer may withdraw goods prior to completion of the sale. No reserve. Goods cannot be withdrawn after auctioneer calls for bids unless no bid is received within a reasonable time. So it was very important here that it was no indication if it was with or without reserve. So let's kind of read through the explanation. The UCC has special rules for goods sold at auction. If goods are auctioned in lots, each lot represents a separate sale. Whether goods can be withdrawn once the auctioneer calls for bids depends on the type of auction. At a reserve auction, which is presumed unless a no reserve auction is announced, so that's key, you presume reserve, the auctioneer may withdraw goods from auction prior to completion of the sale. At a no reserve auction, which must be specifically announced, goods cannot be withdrawn from auction after the auctioneer calls for bids unless no bid is received for the reasonable time. In either type of auction, a bidder may retract the bid until the auctioneer announces the completion of the sale, the fall of the auctioneer's hammer. However, bidder's retraction will not revive any earlier bids. Here, the auction was presumably held with reserve since there's no indication that no reserve auction was specifically announced. That means the auctioneer presumably withdrew the backhoe upon receiving the contractor signal prior to bringing down her gavel, announcing the completion of the sale. As a result, the contractor remains with the owner of the backhoe, and the court will likely rule in his favor. So C was incorrect because the UCC does not prohibit a seller from communicating with the auctioneer using a prearranged signal. So during a reserve auction, the auctioneer may withdraw goods from the auction prior to completion of the sale, before the auctioneer's hammer falls. At a no reserve auction, goods generally cannot be withdrawn after the auctioneer calls for bids. I will tell you, I've taken the MBE 4 times. I've never seen this exact question type on the exam. So if this is like something that you don't want to focus on, I could understand it. But I also think that like, the more you know, the better. So um, let's see what the takeaway here. Can you go back to the explanation real quick? So it says during a reserve auction. Okay. So during a reserve auction, which is presumed unless a no reserve auction is specified, the auctioneer may retract the offer at any time before the sale is completed when the gavel strikes. At a no reserve auction, which must be specified, once the sale is announced, right? The bidding begins, the offer cannot be retracted. There is no UCC rule that prevents a person from giving an auctioneer a special signal to stop the sale of an item in an auction. Right? That's the type of question you might see in the MBE where you're just like, where in the universe did that come from? Right? They're definitely going to have some questions like that. I think that was a really tough question, but very impressive work, Sierra and Adrian, to get every single question right, including that last question that was really tough. Morgan, you had a question?
Yeah, so would you consider this type of question like testing some sort of special, like unilateral contract rule?
I think it's testing an auction rule, right? Like it's testing the rules of auctions because this seems very specific. No reserve versus reserve, the striking of a gavel. So I would kind of separate and compartmentalize this from any other rules and just, very narrowly accept that in a reserve auction, the auctioneer can cancel the sale at any time before the gavel is struck. In a no reserve auction, once the sale is announced, and they call for bids, then they cannot withdraw the goods. And again, like Sierra said, and I echo that, I don't really know the rules of auctions, but it's within the potential testable material. So if you're stuck with a choice to know something or not know something, I would err on the side of knowing it. And now as a class, we've all learned this. No reserve versus reserve auctions. We assume reserve auction unless specified. Reserve auction means at any time before the gavel is struck, they could take away the goods. At a no reserve auction, once the sale is announced and they start accepting bids, they can no longer take away the goods from sale. So it's just a very specific auction rule. And it goes to show the questions are all over the place. Some of them are really easy, some of them are really hard, some are very specific, some are very broad. But I think today's class was a good sample size of the types of questions you'll see on test day. And, hopefully y'all learned something from today. Does anyone else have any other questions about anything? All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording.